$200 versus $18,000 is not a small difference. It is the kind of number that makes you stop, stare, and realize that the modern energy market may have been selling convenience at a price most families should never have had to pay. I am standing beside a plain Amish outbuilding in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, looking at a wood gasifier that does not look impressive until you understand what it represents. There is no polished branding here, no glossy sales pitch, no utility company telling you this is the only practical option, just metal, wood, heat, and a machine built around a simple idea. Turn local fuel into usable energy, and that is what makes this so unsettling. Because once you see a machine like this, working beside a system that costs almost 90 times more, the question is no longer whether it works. The question is why almost nobody was ever told that a system this simple existed at all. Standing with me is Eli. He talks about this setup like a man who actually lives with it, not a man repeating theory from a brochure. He talks about fuel the way other people talk about groceries. He talks about maintenance the way others talk about weather. That tells you everything you need to know about how this technology exists in Amish life. It is not a curiosity, it is part of the farm. The air here is quiet, but the logic is loud. A family can control its own fuel path with local wood, simple upkeep, and a machine they can understand without waiting on a corporation to approve the next repair. That kind of independence is exactly what expensive energy systems take away. And once you understand that, the real tension begins. Because this is not just about a machine, it is about the way ordinary people were taught to believe that dependence was normal and that anything simple must somehow be inferior. It is about the difference between being sold energy and being able to make it. In places like Lancaster County, Holmes County, Geauga County, Wayne County, and the Amish settlements in Indiana, this kind of knowledge survives because it is passed from one generation to the next in daily life. Not in theory, not in slogans, in work. A boy learns by stacking fuel. A father teaches by showing what lasted through winter. A neighbor explains what dried too slowly in spring rain. That is how practical knowledge stays alive. And once you understand that, the next question becomes mechanical instead of cultural. What is actually happening inside the gasifier that makes wood into useful energy in the first place? To understand why a wood gasifier fits so naturally into Amish life, you have to understand the kind of world it belongs to. This is not a culture built around convenience for convenience's sake. It is a culture built around usefulness, repairability, and control. In Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, Holmes County, Ohio, Geauga County, Ohio, Wayne County, Ohio, and the Amish settlements in Indiana, practical knowledge survives because it is not treated like a trend. It is treated like something a family lives with every day. That knowledge has been passed down for generations. A child does not learn it from a lecture. A child learns it by watching fuel stacked under cover, by hearing how the air moves through a machine, by seeing what happens when wood is too wet, and by noticing how a system behaves when the weather turns cold. A father teaches what a book cannot. An uncle shows what failed last winter. A neighbor explains what dried too slowly in the spring rain. That is how practical skill moves through Amish life. A typical morning in that world starts before the day gets loud. The air is cold. The work is quiet. The first task is often preparation. Fuel is checked. Tools are ready. Heat is managed. Nothing is done carelessly because the whole system depends on discipline. If the wood is not dry, it is set aside. If the machine needs cleaning, it is opened. If something can be repaired with simple tools, it is repaired before it becomes a bigger problem. This is not a lifestyle built on endless replacement. It is built on attention. Fuel has to be sorted, dried, and stored. Equipment has to be inspected. Repairs have to be simple enough to handle without outside help. If something is too fragile, too expensive, or too dependent on a service company, it loses value fast. In Lancaster County, that logic shows up in the way farms are run with practical routines that repeat every season. In Holmes County and Wayne County, the same pattern appears in workshops and homesteads, where simple systems matter more than appearance. In Geauga County and Indiana settlements, the rule is the same again and again. Use what works, repair what breaks, and avoid dependence whenever possible. That is what makes a wood gasifier fit so naturally. It does not ask a family to become dependent on a utility company or a constant stream of commercial fuel. It asks them to do what they already do well: manage materials carefully, keep things dry, maintain equipment with discipline, and value systems that can be understood from the ground up. The machine rewards habits the Amish already live by. It works best when the fuel is consistent, when the airflow is controlled, when the operator pays attention, and when nothing is neglected for too long. In that sense, it is not an outsider's machine dropped into Amish life. It is an extension of the same practical mindset that has kept these communities functioning for generations. And that is exactly why the next question matters so much. What is actually happening inside the gasifier that turns ordinary wood into usable energy? A wood gasifier works by turning solid wood into combustible gas through controlled heat and limited oxygen. Instead of letting the wood burn all the way to ash, the system forces it through a process that releases energy in stages. That is the entire trick. It is not magic. It is chemistry, airflow, and temperature control working together in a very specific way. The process usually moves through 4 steps. First, the wood dries. Second, it breaks down into char and volatile compounds in a stage called pyrolysis. Third, a limited amount of oxygen creates the heat needed to keep the reaction going. Fourth, the hot char reacts with carbon dioxide and water vapor in the reduction zone, producing a gas mixture that can be used for heat or power. If any one of those steps is off, the output drops fast. Moisture is one of the biggest variables. Dry fuel works better because the machine does not have to waste energy boiling water out of the wood before gas can form. Wet fuel slows the whole process, creates tar, and weakens output. That is why fuel preparation is so important. A gasifier is not just a machine, it is a fuel discipline. The gas itself is a mix of carbon monoxide, hydrogen, methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. That is why it can be used as a fuel, but it also explains why the system has to be handled carefully. It is not as convenient as propane. Propane is easy to store and easy to use, but it is bought fuel tied to a market price and a delivery chain. Wood gas is harder to manage, but it can be made from local biomass. That means the family or farm that runs it controls a lot more of the process. That is the real comparison. Propane gives convenience. Wood gas gives independence. One is a finished commercial product. The other is a conversion system that turns ordinary material into usable energy. This is not a fringe idea. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection published its Wood Gasification Decision-Making Guide in 2020, treating wood gasification as a real rural energy option that can be evaluated and used in practical settings. The U.S. Department of Energy has also treated biomass gasification as a legitimate energy pathway in technical material, including its 2024 Guidance on Standalone Renewable Systems. The physics was never the problem. The physics worked. The engineering trade-off is simple. A propane setup is cleaner at the point of use and easier for most people to operate. A wood gasifier is more hands-on, but it can radically reduce dependence on purchased fuel if the user has access to wood and is willing to manage the system carefully. In real terms, the fuel has to be dry, the airflow has to be controlled, and the gas has to be cleaned before use. If the fuel is too wet, the system makes tar. If the airflow is wrong, the reaction becomes unstable. If the gas is not filtered, the downstream equipment can be damaged. That is why this technology tends to survive in places where people understand maintenance as a way of life. It rewards patience. It punishes shortcuts. It works best when the operator respects the limits of the process instead of trying to force it. And once you understand that, the reaction becomes unavoidable. Why did nobody ever tell me this? If the physics is real and the engineering is real, then the question becomes painfully simple. Why did this stay outside the mainstream for so long? The answer is not one single conspiracy. It is a layered system of incentives, regulatory friction, and market preference that quietly pushes people toward the expensive option and away from the practical one. Energy markets do not reward independence. They reward repeat customers. They reward infrastructure that keeps people buying fuel, paying delivery fees, renewing contracts, and depending on outside service. That is true whether the fuel is propane, heating oil, or any other commercial system built around recurring purchases. A wood gasifier interrupts that pattern. It reduces dependence on the chain, and anything that reduces dependence is a problem for a business model built on repetition. That is why the gap feels so offensive once you see it clearly. A family is told that the expensive system is normal because it is modern, clean, and professional. But the lower-cost system is often the one that gives the family more control. It can be maintained locally. It can be fed with wood from the land. It can keep working without waiting on a company, a truck, or a price spike. That difference has consequences. The commercial energy industry has long understood the value of scale, branding, and lock-in. Large fuel suppliers, equipment manufacturers, and service providers all benefit when the consumer has no practical alternative. Even when a cheaper system exists, it can be sidelined by the simple fact that it does not fit the normal sales pipeline. It does not generate the same margins. It does not create the same recurring revenue. It does not require the same chain of middlemen, and the public rarely gets the full picture. A low-cost wood-based system should have been part of the conversation much earlier, especially in rural areas where the raw fuel already exists on site or nearby. But instead of being treated as a serious option, it was often treated as a niche curiosity, a backyard oddity, or something too inconvenient for modern life. That framing matters. Once people are trained to see a practical system as unusual, they stop asking why the expensive option became the default. The financial motive is not complicated. Dependence is profitable. Independence is not. That is why the reaction to a machine like this is so strong. It is not just the price difference. It is the realization that families were often guided toward complexity when simplicity was available. They were guided toward purchased fuel when local fuel could work. They were guided toward systems they could not fully understand when a simpler path existed that they could maintain themselves. And that is where the quiet outrage comes from. Not because the commercial system has no value, not because every low-tech solution is automatically better, but because people were not given an honest comparison soon enough. Once you see that, the machine beside the Amish farm stops looking like a curiosity and starts looking like evidence. Evidence that the expensive version was never the only version, evidence that the more convenient system was not always the most necessary one, evidence that many families were sold a story about energy that left out the part where ordinary people could still control their own fuel. And that is the real motive behind the silence. A practical system that lowers dependence also lowers profit. If you want this kind of system to work, you do not start with fire. You start with dry fuel, controlled airflow, and a machine simple enough to maintain. The goal is not to burn wood better. The goal is to convert wood into a usable gas in a way that stays stable, clean enough, and repeatable enough to be useful. Start with the fuel. Use clean, dry hardwood chunks, ideally split to a consistent size, around 1 to 3 inches across. Keep the moisture content low, ideally under 20%, because wet fuel wastes. Heat boiling off water before the gasification process can work properly. Store the wood under cover so rain and humidity do not undo the drying work. If the fuel is inconsistent, the system will be inconsistent too. Next, build around a proven layout. A basic downdraft gasifier usually includes a hopper, a reaction chamber, an air inlet, a reduction zone, and an outlet for gas. The hot section should be built from steel that can handle heat without warping too quickly. Thin metal fails fast. Use thicker material where the heat is highest, and make the design easy to open for cleaning and inspection. You also need a simple cooling and filtration setup. The gas leaving the reactor is hot, dirty, and full of particles. A cooling tube settling chamber or basic filter stage helps remove heat and debris before the gas goes to an engine or burner. If you skip this step, tar and dust can damage downstream equipment very quickly. That is one of the most common mistakes beginners make. Control the air carefully. Gasification only works when oxygen is limited. Too much air, and you get ordinary combustion. Too little, and the reaction becomes weak and unstable. The intake should be adjustable so you can tune it during testing. Do not assume the first settings will be correct. Test slowly, watch the behavior, and make one change at a time. For a small household or workshop setup, keep the system compact. A smaller reactor is easier to manage, easier to clean, and easier to troubleshoot. If your goal is backup heat or emergency power, you do not need to overbuild the fuel handling side. If your goal is longer continuous operation, then you need a better filter, more fuel storage, and a more disciplined maintenance routine. Climate matters too. In cold climates, insulation around the reactor becomes more important because startup takes longer, and condensation can create extra problems. In humid climates, fuel drying becomes the real battle, because damp wood can ruin performance fast. In a dry western climate, the fuel may dry more easily, but dust control can become a bigger issue, so the storage area needs to stay clean and protected. A practical rule is simple. If the gasifier is acting unstable, check the fuel first. Most failures come from wet fuel, inconsistent chunk size, poor airflow, or leaks in the system. One common mistake is trying to burn through wet wood and hoping the machine will compensate. It will not. The fix is to dry the fuel longer than you think you need to, keep it covered, and feed the system with consistent pieces. That is the part most people miss. A system like this is not hidden because it is impossible. It is hidden because it rewards discipline, local control, and patience. And those are exactly the things the commercial energy model does not profit from. This is not a theory that only works in a farm setting. The same basic idea has already been proven in large-scale energy systems, where local biomass is turned into dependable heat and power. One example is the biomass-based district energy system in Växjö, Sweden. It has been developed over decades and is widely known for using local biomass as part of the city's energy strategy. The important point is simple. When the fuel is local and the system is designed properly, biomass can support real infrastructure at city scale. Another example is Avadora Power Station in Hvidovre, Denmark. Since the early 2000s, biomass has been part of its broader energy framework. That matters because it shows this is not an experiment. It is not a backyard fantasy. It is part of a serious industrial energy system that exists to reduce dependence on conventional fuel. A third example comes from regional biomass energy applications in Bulgaria, where biomass-based systems have been used in energy planning and district heating contexts to reduce reliance on imported fuel. Again, the exact setup is different from a farm gasifier, but the principle is the same. Local organic fuel can be converted into useful energy when the system is built correctly. That is what makes the Amish example so powerful. The farm machine is not separate from the larger story. It is the small version of a proven idea. The scale changes, but the logic does not. Local fuel, controlled conversion, practical maintenance, lower dependence. And once you understand that, the machine beside the Amish farm stops looking small. It starts looking like a reminder that energy does not have to be expensive, centralized, or controlled from outside. If you are watching this from Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, or anywhere else, drop your state in the comments and tell me what you currently pay for propane, heating fuel, or the commercial system you rely on. Real numbers expose the gap faster than any sales pitch ever could, and if this is the kind of knowledge you want more of, subscribe to Tradition Done Right and turn on notifications right now. Not because it sounds nice, because the algorithm will not bring this to you. You have to choose to stay. The next video matters even more because I'm going to show you a simple off-grid method that can keep working even when the power goes out for days. And the shocking part is how little material it actually takes to build it. That is the kind of thing most people never hear about until they are already in trouble. What matters most is not that old systems are always better. What matters is that people deserve to know what still works before they are forced to pay for what does not.